Well, good morning again. There's an old legend about a New England town that was suffering through all manner of dissension and backbiting. The people were constantly involved in petty feuds, pitting neighbor against neighbor. One day, the people came together and consulted a wise pastor as to how they could resolve their differences. The pastor agreed to think on the matter and sent them a letter soon detailing his judgment. A few days later, the pastor sat down and wrote his letter to the people, full of advice on how to make peace in their town. He also sat down and wrote a letter to a farmer friend of his who was having trouble with a bull. Then the pastor called up two messengers, gave them the two letters, and sent them on their way. Well, you can guess what happened. The pastor accidentally mixed up the letters. The message for the town got sent to the farmer friend. The message for the farmer friend got sent to the feuding town. Here's the message that the townspeople received. You had better see that your fences are put up well in the first place. Plow your ground deep and sort your seed. Be careful not to sow foul seed, and take care of that great ugly bull. I think you had better poke him. The rest I will tell you when I come. The townspeople sat in silence for a long time, contemplating the pastor's strange message. Finally, one man stood and attempted to interpret it. The putting up of fences must refer to the rules of discipline in the church. The people had neglected these rules of discipline for far too long. And plowing up the ground must be another way of saying that the people need to open their hearts to allow the good seed of brotherly love to be sown. The warning against foul seed was obvious. The citizens had an obligation to sort the truth from the untruth and not to believe every morsel of gossip that they heard. And the great ugly bull could only symbolize the devil, who had come into their midst and stirred up so much strife among them. The people were so moved by the pastor's advice that they began confessing their sins and offering forgiveness to one another. They opened up their hearts to one another and prayed for each other, and peace reigned in the once feuding town. I wish other feuds could be settled that quickly and that easily, don't you? I'm thinking of feuds in families, feuds in churches, feuds between spouses, and so on. Actually, Jesus has given us a formula for solving most of the interpersonal problems that afflict us. He did it in the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or a sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you'll be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you'll be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. First of all, Jesus says, take charge of your inner life, and outer actions will take care of themselves. Thoughts are parents to deeds. Jesus was clear that we may pride ourselves on never committing murder or theft or adultery, but we have murderous hearts, larcenous hearts, adulterous hearts, and the potential is there for us to do wrong. We need to take charge of our thoughts. Richard F. Shepard, in his book, In Enemy Waters, tells about two men he saw pummeling each other in a gutter where each had a car half parked, one front forward, the other backward, in a parking space. The rationality of it all, he says, was emphasized by a sign in front of the parking place that said, "No parking." Of course, the point wasn't that they were both trying to park in a no parking zone. The point was that they both were probably carrying around anger that was just waiting to erupt. There was an article in the newspapers a few years back about two men in Philadelphia who got into an argument over who was the better point guard, Allen Iverson, then of the 76ers, or Gary Payton of the erstwhile Seattle Supersonics. Words turned to gunfire, and when the smoke cleared, two innocent bystanders, a man and a woman, both of whom were parents of small children, lay dead. Do you think that either combatant in that fight really cared that much about who was the best point guard? Of course not. They were simply venting anger. Anger can make you do stupid things. In the book Wit and Wisdom from the Peanut Butter Gang by H. Jackson Brown Jr., some children offer advice on spotting and dealing with anger. Morgan, age 11, says, "When your mom is mad at your dad, don't let her brush your hair." Leslie, age 11, advises, "When your mother is mad and asks you, 'Do I look stupid?' it's best not to answer her." Children become quite adept at spotting the signs of anger because so often they become the unsuspecting target of adult anger. Martin Luther King admonished his people to avoid not only violence of deed, but violence of spirit. That's sound advice. If we will take charge of our inner emotions, our outer actions will take care of themselves. The second half of the formula Jesus gives for interpersonal relationships is, nip problems in the bud. Do not let them get out of hand. Do not let them fester. Deal with them at once. Here's how Jesus put it. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Again, that's sound advice. Problems that are not solved immediately often grow in size. Philip Yancey, in his book, What's So Amazing About Grace, gives thoughtful treatment to the word resentment. Resentment literally means to feel again. Resentment clings to the past, relives it over and over, picks each fresh scab so that the wound never heals. This pattern doubtless began, says Yancey, with the very first couple on earth. Think of all the squabbles Adam and Eve must have had in the course of their 900 years, wrote Martin Luther. Eve would say, "You ate the apple," and Adam would retort, "You gave it to me." Yancey tells about two novels by Nobel Prize-winning authors that illustrates this pattern in a modern setting. In the novel Love in the Time of Cholera, Gabriel Garcia Marquez portrays a marriage that disintegrates over a bar of soap. It was the wife's job to keep the house in order, including provision of towel, toilet paper, and soap in the bathroom. One day she forgot to replace the soap, an oversight that her husband mentioned in an exaggerated way. "I have been bathing for almost a week without any soap," and that she vigorously denied it. Though it turned out that she had indeed forgotten, her pride was at stake, and she would not back down. For the next 7 months, they slept in separate rooms and ate in silence. Even when they were old and placid, writes Marquez, they were very careful about bringing it up, for the barely healed wounds could begin to bleed again, as if they had been inflicted only yesterday. How can a bar of soap ruin a marriage? Because neither partner would say, "Stop, this cannot go on. I'm sorry. Forgive me." The Knot of Vipers by Francois Mauriac tells a similar story of an old man who spends the last decades of his marriage sleeping down the hall from his wife. A rift had opened 30 years before over whether the husband showed enough concern when their 5-year-old daughter fell ill. Now, neither husband nor wife is willing to take the first step. Every night he waits for her to approach him, but she never appears. Every night she lies awake, waiting for him to approach her, and he never appears. Neither will break the cycle that began years before. Neither will forgive. Shall we say it again? Stupid, stupid, stupid. But it happens. Do not harbor negative thoughts in your heart. If a problem arises in your marriage, or with your children, or between you and someone here at church, or wherever that disagreement may occur, go to the other person involved and nip it in the bud. Take care of it quickly. It is sad to see disputes go unresolved and to see resentment where there should be love. Often healing comes as soon as one party is willing to take the first step. When Dr. Harold H. Bloomfield learned that his father was dying of cancer, he resolved to visit him more often. This was not necessarily an easy thing to resolve. There was a certain amount of coldness and estrangement between Harold and his father. Harold's parents had a contentious marriage, mainly due to his father's argumentative nature. The elder Bloomfield had always been a stoic, unable or unwilling to communicate his feelings to his son. As a result, Harold did not receive the necessary emotional support and nurturing he deserved. Over the years, resentments had built up between the two of them that made their visits difficult for Harold. But knowing that his father had only 6 months to live, Harold decided that he would make the effort to be there for his father. The first visit between father and son was pretty routine. But on the second visit, Harold did something completely unexpected. He told his father that he loved him, and he offered him a hug. This was unheard of in the Bloomfield family. At first, Harold's father seemed completely unwilling to allow himself to be hugged. Harold, angry and hurt, wanted to forget the whole thing and leave. But slowly, his father yielded to the hug. The first step didn't immediately change the Bloomfields' relationship, but Harold didn't give up. Each time he visited, he expressed his love for his father, and he gave him a hug. And slowly, the elder Bloomfield began to loosen up and accept this new love from his son. It was a major breakthrough when, after about 200 hugs had passed between father and son, Harold's father finally blurted out the words, "I love you." This was the first time in memory that Harold's father had ever said this to him. Instead of dying after 6 months, Harold's father lived on for another 4 more years. In this time, Harold and his father were able to communicate better and share their feelings more deeply than Harold had imagined they ever would. Harold found that this new relationship with his father affected all other relationships in his life. He could give love more freely and fully, and he found a measure of peace in his life that he had never known before. Think of the years lost because of the rupture of this relationship. But someone took the first step, and that is what Christ requires out of each of us. Jesus has given us the formula for making relationships work. Remember, the inner emotion gives expression in the outer deed. If there's an important relationship in our lives that is not as it ought to be, get busy making it right, immediately. But there's one more thing that needs to be said. Bring that important relationship to the altar. Jesus said that when we come to the altar, if we remember that someone has something against us, we should first go and take care of it. But notice he tells us that once we take care of the matter, we're to come to the altar. And that's something important for us to note. Bring that relationship that is hurting to the altar. If it really is important to you, get God's help. God will help you deal with those feelings of resentment, those feelings of anger. God will help you regain your perspective. Jane Schmidt says that one Saturday morning, she awoke to the delightful smell of waffles and the sound of her 2 small boys in the kitchen with her husband. Patting down to breakfast, she sat on her husband's lap and gave him a big hug for his thoughtfulness. Later that day, she and her husband were having a heated discussion in their bedroom when their 4-year-old Jacob stopped them in mid-sentence. Standing in the doorway, he said, "Mommy, try to remember how you felt when you were on Daddy's lap." Sometimes we simply need to regain our perspective. The altar is one place where that can happen. Will you please pray with me? Lord Jesus, you have called us to follow you. We know of our faults and our failures, our weaknesses and our defeats. Therefore, we wonder why you have called us who are fallible and weak, to your way. Lord, help us to see ourselves as you see us, to believe in others as much as you believe in us, to reach out for your grace, empowering us to live more perfected lives than we could have lived without you. Amen.